Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. I want to address the disrespect that's being thrown towards Oklahoma as they prepare for their first ever game as an official member of the SEC against the Tennessee Vols. And I've watched a lot of breakdowns and previews for this game on YouTube, and anytime I scroll to the comment section, I see a lot of Tennessee fans saying how they're about to hang 40 on Oklahoma, which is absolutely blasphemous. Because Brent Venables, Oklahoma's head coach, is one of the best defensive minds in college football. And it seems like a lot of us have forgotten just how good of a defensive coordinator he was when he was at Clemson. And there's a narrative about Oklahoma that I really believe is untrue. Just because they come from a weak conference that is the Big 12 doesn't mean that they're going to struggle and they're unprepared for the level of competition that they're about to face in the SEC. As a matter of fact, Oklahoma has out-recruited Tennessee every year that Brent Venables has been down there in Norman, and they have out-recruited the majority of teams in this conference. And they also have a winning record against the SEC as well. And we all know that Tennessee has one of the most explosive, if not the most explosive offense in college football. They're loaded at wide receiver. You got Chris Brazil, talented transfer from Tulane. Deontay Thorin, he transferred into this program last year from Oregon. Bro McCoy. I love me some Squirrel White. I think he has the best name in college football. They got a great offensive line. They got Dylan Sampson at running back. This dude is a monster. And we all know about this redshirt freshman phenom that they have at quarterback and Nico Imaviava. But we got to stop treating Nico like he's Mr. Perfect at quarterback. Against NC State, he had a couple of interceptions in that game. And you're going up against an Oklahoma defense that's being incredibly underrated going into this game. This should be a top 3 defense in the SEC this year. They return a lot of production from last year's unit. They got a great secondary with a lot of depth. They got a really good front seven. We know how good Denny Stutzman is. He's one of the best defensive players in America. And the biggest Achilles heel that Brent Venables has had to deal with at Oklahoma for his first couple of years has been their inability to get consistent pressure on a quarterback and not having a lot of depth up front. Well, they have fixed that problem this year. They got a really good defensive tackle named Dominic Williams out of the transfer portal from TCU that everybody wanted. They improved their pass rush. And with the talent and experience that they have in the back end of their secondary, they match up really well with the depth that Tennessee has at wide receiver. And I would be incredibly surprised if Tennessee wins this game in blowout fashion, because this is an Oklahoma defense that's going to be aggressive. They're going to throw a lot of exotic looks at Nico Imaviava. And you're asking a lot of a guy who's never played in an environment this tough to just have a completely perfect game. He's going to have a few mistakes. Oklahoma leads college football in takeaways per game. They also were one of the best defenses last year in forcing turnovers. That is what makes Brent Venables' defense so great. They're aggressive and they force a lot of turnovers. And just because Oklahoma has struggled against inferior competition like Tulane and Houston doesn't mean that they're just destined to get blown out in this game. I know that Tennessee has crushed everybody they played this year, Chattanooga, Kent State, and NC State. But last week, Kentucky only lost to Georgia by 1 point, despite getting crushed by South Carolina the week before. They couldn't even get a pass thrown or completed past the line of scrimmage in that game. So what that Georgia-Kentucky game showed is that it's not easy to win on the road when you're playing in the toughest conference in America, that is the Southeastern Conference. And Brent Venables is also 13-2 at home as the head coach of Oklahoma football. And Tennessee, if we're being honest, they got more to prove in this game than what Oklahoma does. Tennessee has been notoriously known over the last couple of years that anytime they go into marquee matchups like this, when they have high expectations, they normally disappoint. I remember back in 2022, They went to play Georgia on the road, and they got absolutely clobbered in that game, and I lost $500 betting on the Vols. Tennessee is expected to be a playoff team, and they possibly could win the SEC title this year. Oklahoma, the expectations aren't high for them. Most analysts project them to be a middle-of-the-pack team in the SEC this year. So that means that Tennessee has more to prove than what Oklahoma does when you think of the expectations between both of these two teams. And Oklahoma has been the better of the two programs over the last decade. They've been to the college football playoffs a few times. They've won numerous Big 12 championships. They got in a lot of players drafted high in the NFL draft. This is not some scrub run-of-the-mill program. They're not NC State. They're not Kent State. And they damn sure aren't Chattanooga. You're going to get tested against a really quality team in Oklahoma. They've recruited at a top 10 level under Brent Venables every single year. They've out-recruited you. And they have a top 10 roster from a talent standpoint in college football this year. I'm not saying that Tennessee is not going to win this game. If anything, I would take Tennessee outright. But I love the value of Oklahoma as an underdog at home when you think about how hostile of an environment it is in Norman and how difficult it is to win on the road when you have to play Oklahoma. This is the same Oklahoma team that beat Texas last year. That same Longhorns team went to the college football playoffs. They came really close to making it to the national championship. And they also beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. So it's not like this is a Texas team that hasn't gone up against SEC level competition before. And Tennessee, they're not as good as what a lot of people think they are. With the way that Tennessee's being talked about going into this game, you would have think that they're Ohio State, they're Alabama, they're Georgia, somebody like that. They haven't shown enough to be warranted of the praise that they're receiving in this game. This isn't going to be a runaway game for them. This is going to be a fairly competitive game. The biggest question comes down to if Oklahoma's offensive line is going to be competent in this game, and they should, because they do have a few starters returning on that O-line, which should give them more productivity on the ground. They got a few receivers that have missed time of injuries that are going to play in this game. Oklahoma's going to show a lot of people that they're a better team than what most people thought they were coming into this season. I got Tennessee at 10-2, and I had Oklahoma at 9-4 as my predictions before this season kicked off, and I still stand true by those predictions. I believe Tennessee is a great team, but they're not an elite team. For them to be an elite team, they got to be able to win this game. And normally when Tennessee gets into spots like this, based off history, they normally disappoint more times than not. So I don't think enough respect is being thrown towards Oklahoma's way when you think of how well this coaching staff has recruited and developed talent. And if it wasn't for a few special teams hiccups, Oklahoma would have had a better season than what they did last year. They probably would have been in the Big 12 championship. This is a really good program that Brent Venables has built. This isn't the same Oklahoma program that you remember when Lincoln Riley was the head coach. They got a really good quarterback in Jackson Arnold who came out of the same recruiting class as Nico, and he won Gatorade Player of the Year when he was coming out of high school. You know, they got guys like Gavin Sawchuk, one of the better running backs in this conference. There is a lot of talent on Oklahoma's team that nobody seems to be talking about because they're being judged off this narrative that they were a big fish in a small pond, that is the Big 12. But you can't always judge how good a team is based off the conference that they play in. You can be an elite team in a bad conference. Clemson won 2 national championships playing in the down ACC. And if college football has shown us anything, it's that any given Saturday, the mighty can fall, especially when you got to play on the road. Have you not learned from that Georgia-Kentucky game? I mean, last year, Georgia barely was able to beat Auburn, and they still went 12-1 and made it to the SEC championship. College football is a week-to-week sport. Just because Tennessee's been more dominant against lesser competition and Oklahoma has been the polar opposite doesn't mean that you're not going to be in for a tough fight if you are the Vols. Because it's tough to win on the road in college football. History has shown us that. And I don't believe that Tennessee is as good as what people are hyping them up to be. They're a great team, don't get me wrong, but they're not Alabama, Ohio State, or Georgia kind of program yet. They got a lot to prove in this game, more than Oklahoma. Oklahoma's playing with house money. The expectations are low. Most people think they're going to roll over and get clobbered. And they're about to give the SEC a rude awakening that they've always been ready for this conference. They just haven't played in this conference as an official member yet until this game. It's tough to win on the road in college football, and Tennessee's about to figure out why. Nico, I love the brother. I think he's going to be an outstanding quarterback, but I can see him having a tough game with how aggressive Brent Venables is and with how physical Oklahoma's going to be defensively. They're going to be able to slow down that Tennessee rushing attack, and they got enough talent and depth in the secondary to limit the amount of explosive plays that Tennessee can generate in the vertical passing game. You know, I love Oklahoma +7, and I hope that the line goes up to Tennessee -9 with how heavy bettors are taking Tennessee -7, because I really believe that this is going to be a competitive game based off how well Oklahoma has recruited, how well they develop talent, and how good Brent Venables is as a defensive mind. Josh Heupel is a great offensive mind, but Brent Venables, he's in the same class when it comes to defense. And I love the value of Oklahoma being the underdog at home, and I don't think that they're being shown enough respect. So this is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Remember that we are not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Make sure that you follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.